Hi, welcome everyone to our third and final installment of our Serving Up Sustainability series. We're so happy that you could join us. I'm going to introduce our speaker today, who we are thrilled to have. She's actually representing Humane Action Pittsburgh. We've had speakers from other organizations, but now one of our very own is here to speak on single-use plastics and the repercussions kind of surrounding that and how to switch from that. So thank you so much for joining us today. Sabrina is an advocate for recycling, education, and single-use plastic reduction. She's worked on Humane Action Pittsburgh's No Plastic Please and Reimagine Takeout initiatives. She's motivated by a vision of Pittsburghers and Pennsylvanians that are empowered stewards of their local environment. And she operates the Recycle This Pittsburgh website as a resource for Pittsburgh City residents. Sabrina is a professional game designer and lives in the Highland Park neighborhood of Pittsburgh. Thank you so much for joining us again, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Shannon. Hi, folks. As Shannon said, my name is Sabrina Culyba. It's really my pleasure to be here today with you to talk about how and why we can be reducing single-use plastic, particularly in relation to the food industry. And as Shannon mentioned, a lot of my work with Humane Action Pittsburgh has been with two campaigns in particular, the No Plastic Please and the Reimagine Takeout. And I'll talk about both of those in just a bit. So what are we going to cover today? So we're going to start out talking a little bit about the plastic problem and overall its impact on our environment and health, and why it's such a hard problem to solve. And then we're going to go into why is this in particularly an interesting problem for us to talk about in regards to the food sector. And then we'll dig into some concrete strategies to reduce SUP or single-use plastic in food industry and food service businesses. And as part of that, we'll touch on why composting is connected to this issue and connected to the idea of addressing single-use plastic and plastic pollution in general. So I'm sure that you're familiar with the issue of plastic waste and how it impacts our environment. We are all very familiar with scenes like this. No matter where you go, walking in the woods, on the beach, you're going to find plastic waste. Of course, it visibly detracts from our environment, but it's also very expensive. We spend in the United States $11.5 billion cleaning up litter each year. We spend a lot of money. And then there are real implications for our wildlife. We are seeing over and over that some wildlife ingest smaller pieces of plastic, and it's not digestible, obviously, so it just lives inside of them, and then they can eventually starve. Other types of plastic can entangle or entrap animals and be very painful and cruel result of our plastic use. But those are things that we can see, in our environment. But plastic pollution is also connected in a very real way to climate change overall and the global greenhouse gases that we're, as a society, as a planet, really struggling with. Plastic production, the making of plastic, accounts for about 5% of our greenhouse gases. That is more than all of the airline industry. And the thing about plastic production is it is actively growing. It's expected to triple by 2050. So we can expect to see that percentage rise. And of course, we worry about global temperatures. That's a generational problem. That's something that's coming down the line that we're all looking at and seeing. But there's real impacts, real health impacts right now from all of the plastic production. You may have heard of Cancer Alley. It's an area of Louisiana. Take a moment to take in this screen. On the left is a map of Louisiana. Just going to ask and feel free to shout it out. Where do you think Cancer Alley is located? This is a map showing excess cases of cancer. Red is more.
In the red part.
That's right. It's visible. It's visible in the data. And you can see the excess cases goes up to an extra 1,400 cases per million people. It's a huge impact on the region. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency has identified that cancer risk is more than 700 times greater in some portions of this region. And it's not just cancer, of course, people living in the region deal with other health implications, respiratory issues, as well as the decline of wildlife. This is what's going into the air as we produce our plastics. This is what's coming out of the factories. So when plastics are produced, first, before they're turned into items that we use, the spoon and the cup, etc., they're turned into first tiny pellets called nurdles. These are very, very tiny pieces of plastic, and factories that produce the plastic will then ship these nurdles out to manufacturing plants to be turned into products. So these nurdles need to be trucked, they need to be freighted and shipped over water and land to all these other places to be turned into products. And of course, accidents happen, spills happen, derailments happen. This article I pulled from just earlier this year, and you can see the headline, train derailment, nurdle spilled. The article is 2 weeks after the spill, and they're still talking about how it's like impossible to get all these nurdles, collect them all, and they're still being found, including downstream from where the spill happened. And once these nurdles are in the environment, they can again be ingested into animal stomachs. They can make them feel full, stop eating. But there's another real impact for these little plastic nurdles, which is that, like all plastics, they're produced with a whole bunch of different additives. And those additives change like the color and the flexibility of the plastic material. They include a lot of chemicals that we know are harmful for human health. And since the nurdles are so transportable, particularly via water, once they get into the environment, they're carrying these chemicals. If there's a spill, they'll carry these chemicals throughout our environment. And the other really interesting thing is that the plastic surface also collects and harbors, sustains bacteria like E. coli and other types of bacteria. And so now you have a plastic raft, as it's sometimes referred, that is literally transporting bacteria through our water systems. And this is some of the health implications of those little pieces of plastic. Of course, those pieces of plastic are big enough that we can see. But as plastic continues to exist in the environment, it doesn't biodegrade like a lot of other materials. It does break down, though. It can get smaller and smaller into what we call microplastics, and even into even smaller plastics that we call nanoplastics, that are really invisible to the human eye. But we are finding them everywhere. In every pristine corner of the earth, we find microplastics because they're entering like the water cycle system of the earth. And we're also finding them in the human body. So the article on the left here, you can see the headline is a research that was done. 62 human placentas were tested for microplastics. Every single one contained microplastics, every single one. And this article actually came out on Monday. So I added it in here, the one on testicle research. They had 23 humans and 47 dogs. Again, every single sample contained microplastics. And for the dogs, at least, they were able to do a test also of sperm count and found a correlation of lower sperm count for those testicles that contained additional, more microplastics. So we're all engaged in a giant experiment. We have no idea how this is impacting our health and all mammalian health, and potentially other animal species as well. Okay, so the plastics in the environment, we know that's bad. We know there's issues with making the plastics, but maybe we could capture the plastic, we can recycle it, and then we can, by doing that, we can reduce how much new plastic we need to make. So what about recycling? I want to touch briefly on this because it is such a large part of the conversation often when we look at companies that are producing these plastic products. Yes, recycling and using recycled plastics does have a smaller impact climate-wise than creating new plastics. But it's really downcycling. So you often can't use the plastic for, like, again, make the exact same quality of item. It has reduced applicability, and it may not be appropriate for as much as plastic is at all for use in like food situations or health situations where we often use plastic items. And then additionally, it just doesn't happen. 9% of the plastic ever made, ever in the history of the world has been recycled. That we, as far as we can tell, and about 70% of it ends up in our environment effectively, either in a landfill, so a managed space, or as litter. And about 20% gets incinerated because there's no place to put it. And of course, all the chemicals in the plastic through incineration, we're creating a lot of contamination that way as well. Plastics in landfills also commonly emit methane and ethylene when exposed to sunlight. And these are two very significant greenhouse gases. So plastic in landfill, though it may not be in our rivers and waters, it still has a negative impact at end of life. And I won't dig into this too much, but I'll just briefly say, we all know those chasing arrows, at least in the US, it's on all the plastic products. Those chasing arrows were established through lobbying by the plastics industry, and they do not correlate to an item being recyclable. And in particular, they don't correlate to anyone having the infrastructure to recycle that item. Most municipal processing facilities cannot reliably sort most of the plastic items. And because many of these plastic items, especially the highly disposable ones, are very light, they often get commingled with paper recycling, and we have invested in a single stream process here in the United States at least. And so because of that, plastic actually contaminates paper and reduces the value of the paper for recycling. And paper is very, very recyclable. So the amount of plastic that we're trying to put into our recycling stream is actually sometimes bringing down the amount overall that we can recycle of all our different materials. Just to get a little perspective, if you get a fork today, that little line at the start of this giant gray line, that's today. We'll fast forward, 2050. This is a date that's well known it's been a well-publicized stat that by 2050, the amount of plastic in the ocean by weight will outweigh the weight of all the fish in the ocean. That spoon is still there. Fast forward, our great grandchildren are born. That spoon is still somewhere. Somewhere you can get my spoon back. And then in 2276, yeah, America turns 500. If only we live so long, or only the country survives so long. But the spoon is still there. You can celebrate eating with the same spoon if you can find it wherever it is in the environment. This spoon's gonna last for 500 years. And the crazy thing is that the first plastic ever, 1907 is when plastic is invented. The first plastic spoon mass produced 1950s. It really hasn't been that long since plastic even existed as a concept and as a physical product. And we're still just a brief period of time away from, and now we're a brief period of time away from more plastic in the ocean than fish. And everything that we're making, everything that's been produced since the 1950s, it's going to be here 500, 1,000 years in the future, unless we can solve this problem. Okay, so yeah, it's a problem, but why are we talking about food service? Where does the food service industry fit in? So to answer that question, let's go back and look at the litter question. So this is a visualization of data from a study that was done at the University of Cadiz, Spain. And it looked at different aquatic environments and the top 10 litter items, not specifically plastic necessarily, but the top 10 litter items in each of the environments. And they broke those down into 3 broad categories: takeout consumer, which includes most like food service related items; ocean and waterway, which would be like fishing related or synthetic ropes, etc., and then some industrial household items. Let's zoom in a little closer because I know this is kind of small. We'll just look at the river, shoreline, and nearshore waters. Now, these items, if you see that little black line right here, that line is the 50% mark. So everything above there accounts for 50% at least of what is found. Any trends stand out to anyone?
Lot of plastic.
A lot of plastic. And what is that plastic related to?
Takeout.
Yeah, it's almost exclusively food related. We have food containers. The bags might not be food, but probably a lot of grocery and takeout bags. Got food wrappers. We've got straws. We've got coffee cups. A lot of these items, the most common items in all these environments that we're seeing are these single-use disposable food items. So in terms of the litter origins, across all the environments, 50 to 88% are food related items. And most of that, 44% of all litter is food service related plastic. So that means that there's a huge opportunity in the food sector to change the trajectory of plastic waste and also plastic demand, particularly for short-term single-use items. We can do so as consumers if we're in decision-making positions in businesses, then we can also do so as food service businesses. So, and our impact can be quite high, and that's why we're talking about this today. You know, every day we're ordering food, we're preparing food, and we're getting back single-use plastic. We're eating our way. We've so tightly bound up our food, everyday food consumption with the casual production, usage, and discarding of single-use plastic that we're literally eating our way into a garbage-filled planet with all of the other health and environmental implications that comes with producing plastic as a resource. So I want to briefly introduce Humane Action Pittsburgh's No Plastic Please campaign. This is a campaign that was focused or is focused on empowering individual consumers to be able to say no to 8 of the most common types of single-use plastic items. And this campaign began, I can't remember exactly how many years ago, but it predates the study that I just shared. But you know, for a long time, we've known through various information about like what are some of the most common items we're finding in litter, and it's consistent. And so the 8 items that this campaign focuses on overlaps, you'll see pretty much completely with the items in those that are the top litter items, the top plastic items that are being produced. All these items, they're all commonly found in food industries. They're widely pervasive. So the reason why this campaign focuses on these items is because you're likely to get handed them during your casual interaction with businesses. And also the idea is they're actually pretty easy to replace. If you're prepared, if you plan ahead, if you're expecting it, you can position yourself to be able to say no to that plastic spoon. I don't need it. I've got my own. I don't need the takeout container. I've got my own. I don't need a plastic bag. I've got my own. And that's the bulk. That is the big part of our the campaign's guidance for individuals is to create a single-use plastic-free kit that you can take with you that empowers you to be able to say, I don't need the single-use plastic you're providing me because I have a reusable object that is going to fulfill that need. So the campaign is really individually oriented. And what I want to talk about today is how can we as businesses, for those of you that are in the business sector, how can we be the other side of this and support the idea of reducing single-use plastic and offering it less, reducing the number of times that guests are forced to make this decision, and really partner with guests who are customers who already care about this issue and are working on it, partner with them to make their choices more effective as well. So we're going to look at how we can, at some of the key moments and key places that we can sort of change the default narrative of what you might do in a food service situation and hopefully cut these 8 items and other similar items out of our everyday consumer interactions. Before we do, I want to point out that we're going to talk mostly about front of the house stuff in businesses. So there's obviously plastic that also happens back of the house, receiving, preparing food, There are definitely places where you can cut single-use plastic on the back end, storing food. But for this conversation, we're going to focus on these front of the house items because they do overlap so strongly with the most common items we find in the environment and that are being produced. So if you're running a food service business or in a food service space and you want to start to tackle this problem, the first thing you should do is start with some kind of audit. And by audit, we mean looking over everything that you're using in your business and find where is the plastic. And you want to take a two-prong approach. So the first is what single-use plastic is coming into your door. What are you bringing into your business? And there's a really easy way to find that out. What are you ordering? Where are you spending money? Possibly on a monthly or at least quarterly basis. What are you buying? How much? How often? That's what's coming in. And then the other thing that you want to audit, want to take a look at and catalog is where and when does each item show up in your interaction with customers? Where is it leaving your space and going out into the world where it will eventually end up most likely as litter or landfill? You know, where is that happening? Because that output rate will determine the input. Assuming that you just keep your single-use plastic items, the faster it leaves, the more you have to bring in. So it's important to get a handle on both of these, and they're both relevant to deciding what strategy you're going to use to address each of the individual items. There are a number of resources online to do this audit. I pulled out, this list here is from a one-sheet form provided by bluestandard.com that has just lists like all of the common front of the house items that they can think of. And as you can see, it includes all of the 8 items from the No Plastic Please campaign and also some other items. But there are a lot of resources like this to do this kind of an audit assessment. So once you've kind of got a sense of where's the plastic coming in, when and where is the plastic going out, let's talk about some strategies to change both of those things. So my number one top favorite strategy, because it doesn't even necessarily require you change anything in terms of what products you're using or what you order, and it's so complementary to individual efforts to say no to plastic, which is don't assume that your customer needs that single-use plastic item. Ask them. As soon as you hand them that straw or that fork, put it down on the table, you're not going to take it back and put it back into stock and reuse it. So as soon as you hand it out, it's now entered the end of life runway for that item. So before you hand it out, do they actually need it? And I'm going to share a couple anecdotes to highlight, I think a lot of the common places of opportunity for this. So here's 3 situations that all happened to me very recently that you probably can relate to. The first is I have a young child. I have a 2-year-old, and I went to a restaurant with my family. We sat down. Everything is reusable. The restaurant really has very little single-use plastic. The waiter comes over. He's brought water cups for us to drink. He's also brought an entirely single-use plastic sippy cup for my 2-year-old with a straw, a lid, and a base cup. Now on the table is our reusable sippy cup that we brought with us with our diaper bag, as you do when you have a 2-year-old. Like, we don't go anywhere without that water cup. Typically, I'm not saying we could never forget it, but we had a sippy cup right there. So it's on the table in front of the child, and this waiter brings over his cup. It's water. It's the same thing, but now we have a piece of trash generated on behalf of my 2-year-old that we did not need, that only cost the business money. And it really was unnecessary. A simple asking before making assumptions would have gone a long way. Similarly, recently at a coffee shop, again with my family, I also have a 10-year-old. We're ordering pastries, breakfast pastries, and we also order a glass of milk. I am waiting at the counter while they're preparing the pastries and the milk, and everyone else is sitting down. And I overhear the 2 folks behind the counter. One of them's asking, "Hey, what glass should I use for the milk?" And the other wait staff says, oh, it's for a kid, so I would use a takeaway cup. And I'm thinking it's for my 10-year-old, and she's quite capable of drinking out of a glass. She doesn't need a paper coffee cup with a plastic lid. And so I interject, actually, we'd like it for here. Everything else is for here. We don't need the paper and plastic cup. If the waitstaff had asked me, it's possible, like for my 2-year-old, I might have said, oh, it would be good to use a non-breakable, a paper cup. I probably would have said no to the lid because we just don't need it. I only was able to say no to those things because I overheard that conversation, and they were engaged in a conversation that was creating a lot of assumptions about what we needed and what kind of materials were necessary. A third one that I'm sure we can all relate to: if you order takeout or carry out or delivery to your house, where you probably eat and cook many times without ordering for delivery, often in the bag you will find a little baggie of plastic cutlery. Plastic cutlery is so unrecyclable. It's one of the most unrecyclable pieces of plastic you will experience on a daily basis. And yet we're automatically given it when we're getting delivery. Delivery is coming to your house where you have your own cutlery. So for all of these items, I think we can easily see that if we just step back from the assumption, we can cut these items, greatly reduce. We don't even have to say that they're not available at all. We can just reduce how often they are given out. And for me as a consumer who doesn't want those items, that's complementing my own efforts and my own strategies. So I think this is a really strong strategy to start with. Where are you assuming that people need single-use plastic, and where can you take those assumptions and turn them into questions that you ask? Now let's talk about the reverse. There is another strategy, which is to have the consumer come to you and ask you for the things that they need. And in particular, we've seen this a very successful, like I call this the ask wall instead of the pay wall. It's just put a little friction in between the consumer taking that single-use plastic item and getting it, so that they take it if they can get it if they really need it. But it's not a casual overuse. Straws are a great place to institute the ask wall. Instead of having a serve yourself straw dispenser, you put up a little sign. We're trying to minimize straw use. If you need a straw, just ask. You have the straw available. Maybe it's even a non-plastic straw, but you keep those straws behind the counter and give them out as asked, because most people don't need a straw for drinking out of a drink. Most people don't use a straw at home when they drink out of their cups. Very few people are grabbing a straw when they're getting a glass of water from their fridge at home. So similarly, they don't necessarily need a straw when out in public. The same thing with plastic cutlery. If you leave plastic cutlery as self-serve, people may just take one of everything. It turns out they really only needed a fork. Meanwhile, they've grabbed a spoon and a knife. It never gets used. It immediately gets thrown in the trash. So by creating an ask wall and offering only by request, we can reduce the number of those items that are leaving the house, and therefore slow down how many of those items we're ordering and cut down the plastic waste. And this is really, really important for takeout. Going back to that, we want to create that ask wall friction place for takeout in particular, because it's very likely to be a situation where the single-use plastic is redundant. Not always the case, but very likely. We're starting to see some traction on this, where some third-party companies like DoorDash and Uber Eats, etc., because of lobbying by groups who care about this issue, have created in their form, when you order, check this box if you need cutlery. But that does not matter if in your process for handling takeout orders and carry out orders, if you don't have intentionally in that process the expectation to be asked. If your assumption is it goes in every bag and that's just, we just stick it in, it probably doesn't matter if there's a little tiny note in the order. I know, because I've done the like check that box before and then still gotten the cutlery because it's an automatic process. So as businesses, we have to be intentional about when we're fulfilling these orders, we only put it in if they ask for it, and working that in that part expectation of an ask into the process. The next strategy we're going to talk about is to change portioning. So we want to minimize single serving packaging. The reason is that single serving packaging, and we have little ketchup packets, little creamer packets, little salad dressing containers. The ratio of plastic packaging to food material is really ridiculous, right? We have a lot of plastic for maybe a tablespoon or less of ketchup, or a tablespoon or less of creamer. And so that's an opportunity to think, well, in most cases, when it's being used in my place business, particularly if people are preparing or eating the food in the business, do they really need a single serving, or can we provide a different form of portioning that would allow us to avoid having giving out these little plastic packets? So for example, coffee creamer, instead of having little tiny coffee creamers, we can have a carafe and refill it. Again, you're inviting the guests into, of course, if it runs out, they have to ask for more, but the result is that all those little tiny individual creamers, of which someone may need 2 or 3, all that packaging goes away. Or another example, this is a recent meal. This is a photo I took from a recent meal I did where I had where we were creating a salad, and it came with the dressing on the side. Okay, I can appreciate allowing the guests to dress the salad themselves. However, I had 2, and I only needed 1. So they gave me 2 sets of salad dressing. What am I going to do with that second container, which I never opened? The only thing I'm going to do is throw it away. The only thing that it's doing is wasting, I mean, for the business is wasting money, both the food inside and the individual on the exterior packaging. So if we think about changing our portions, and one thing you can potentially do in terms of another piece of an audit is to look at, well, where are we seeing the result of a portion mismatch, creating plastic waste? One of those spaces is you give two of something and they only use 1. Well, maybe from now on, just give 1 and say, ask if you need more. Every time they don't ask, you've just saved 50% of the plastic waste on that interaction. A huge part of plastic waste in food service is takeout containers. And this is another place where maybe it makes sense to check your portions. If a lot of folks are taking home food from a particular meal on your menu, that may be an opportunity to offer a smaller version, which would more match what consumers are looking for in that moment, and not require a takeout container at all. When they finish eating, they can just finish it all there. So avoiding single serve packaging because it has a higher plastic ratio, switching to refillable dispensers. When you're giving single serve portions, give 1, let the additional be a request, or maybe even ask completely. Some people may not even want that dressing. And reducing food waste and takeout container usage by evaluating your food portions overall on your menu and reducing the sizes. And the next strategy, the most obvious one potentially, using a reusable. There are reasons why a reusable may not fit a particular use case in your business, but there are some places where, and we'll talk about a few examples, where there is sometimes a immediate assumption that it will be a disposable, or that seems to be the common practice, but it's a very easy place to swap out with a reusable. And it has one of the biggest long-term gain for you as a business and for us, for the environment. So one thing that I want to mention, or that you might, when you talk about reusables, is what's the impact of the bottom line. But we'll talk a little bit about how switching to reusable dishware often pays for itself within months. So yes, there's a little bit of an upfront investment, but it typically in the long run is better for your bottom line. Here are 3 situations where reusables really make a lot of sense, but we often see disposables used in food service. So one is the serve yourself water drink carafe, like at a coffee shop. So you do counter service, you order your coffee or your bagel or something, and then over on the side they have a water dispenser and cups stacked next to it. Often, and often these cups are disposable. Everything else, if you're eating here, if you're like eating on location, is reusable, but for some reason those little water cups are small plastic cups. That's the perfect place to easily replace with a reusable, because you already have, in those businesses, you often already are doing dishwashing service. So swapping out that those plastic cups with reusable glass cups will eliminate that as a purchase order and an ongoing expense. And those dishes can just be included with the other dishwashing. We already talked about the creamers, and instead of using creamers, we can do a carafe, but you can also do single serve cream. So I order the coffee on my tray, I get a little reusable, rewashable carafe with a single serving or of cream that the business can rewash. And additionally, then coffee cups, often, even if you're eating there, sometimes there's an assumption that you want a disposable cup so that you can, get up and leave maybe after you've drunk a little bit at your table. These are places still where it makes sense to bring reusables into your service. The picture of the reusable coffee cup is from Starbucks. Starbucks actually has reusable cups, which you can ask for, but you have to know. They don't tell you, they don't put any signage up, but there are many times when people go to Starbucks and they aren't necessarily getting it to go, and it would be totally appropriate for them to use a reusable mug. So Starbucks has a program like that, but doesn't really promote it. Any coffee shop, any food service could include reusable cups, even if a lot of your customers are taking it to go. Slot in reusables and make it an option and cut down the amount of plastic cups that you're generating and producing. So I mentioned that the money works out, and there have been some case studies on this. So Upstream, which is a nonprofit organization, did a series of case studies, and they saw that small businesses who switched to reusables, they save between $3,000 and $22,000 a year from that switch. They ran a program with nearly 300 food service operators, and 100% of those businesses saved money over the course of the program. Here's a case study from Rethink Disposable. This is for a coffee business, the Conservatory, located in California. And on the left, you see what their typical standard service looked like. And then on the right, you see what they changed to. So on the left, they had a disposable knife, a disposable, though not plastic, stir, disposable coffee cup. There's a plug for the coffee cup, that little plastic, it's almost like a stir, but not quite a stir, that sits in. A disposable self-serve plastic cup for the water. And then what they did is they changed all of that. Instead of a separate stir, they just had they went to cutlery and they used the spoon as the stir. It's actually a reusable mug, which we'll talk about coming up, that is branded. And reusable cups. And through that process, the only change they did for their process on the back end, because they're already washing their plates, they already had a washing process. So the only thing that they really had to change is they added a collection container for the spoon stirrers at the self-serve station, so that folks can get a spoon and drop off their spoon. So there wasn't much labor impact. And they tracked the plastic impact of their switch. So these are just the items that they replaced with the reusable. And you can see the number of items is crazy. 10,000 cups, 12,000 forks, 8,000 knives from doing this process. And then you get to their annual net cost savings. Almost $7,000 they saved in costs making these swaps. Overall, across, they also did a different strategy. We'll talk about, we'll look at some of the other items that they addressed, but across both the strategies that they used to reduce plastic items, they cut the number of plastic items leaving their shop by 205,000. Oh, the cost to purchase the reusables, it was $112 investment to buy the reusable, the additional reusables they needed to support these changes. So a very small investment. So using reusables, the break even upfront investment is usually in spans of months. And even considering higher initial purchase costs and the labor of dishwashing, study after study, there was even a study done by Starbucks who showed that negligible impact of labor when to use reusables to include the increased reusables as part of their washing. Again, often pays for itself within months. And the one additional note I'll say is, wait, if you're implementing this as an optional feature, like you can ask for a reusable if you know you're going to stay, make sure that you tell your guests so that you can take full advantage of the savings for you and them by having that in place. All right, the next strategy, also one of my favorites. Support bring your own. BYO, bring your own anything. I know that we as a culture have accepted the bring your own coffee mug. That's very well established. You can go to most coffee shops and bring your own coffee container. But there is so much more that we could do if we would normalize the idea of bring your own. I locally have a walk-up ice cream shop in my neighborhood. Our family often walks there, and it's a window serve. We bring our own spoons. We have to remind the staff every time, hey, we have our own spoons. Then they hand us the cup and we eat with our spoon, and I would just wash it at home. It's a very small thing. We still have to take the cup. I'm not passing a cup to them and asking them to fill my container for home. That would be actually, I would totally be willing to do that, but that's asking them to take something back into their service. But with the spoon, all they're doing is handing me the cup, and then I can say, we don't need 4 plastic spoons for our 4-person family. We have the spoons we use every day in our house. We walked 3 blocks to get here. It's really easy for us to bring it. Another example is takeout containers. Again, since they're such a large part of the waste, there are solutions now for carrying very lightweight, very compact takeout containers that can pop up and become quite large enough to carry anything that you need. I typically, since we have a diaper bag, I also carry a purse sometimes. I typically have one of these containers in my bag at all times. They're super light. They're very convenient. I've used them for all sorts of things, but in particular, using it for food. The other example I'll mention is we allow coffee mugs. There are other drinks where it's not standard practice to allow folks to substitute their own container, but why not? And in particular, I'm thinking of cold drinks, like a cold coffee or some kind of fruited, flavored soda. Why not allow guests to replace that disposable cup that you're going to hand them with a reusable? So we can certainly, for each business, there may be different opportunities to support this kind of bring your own. But the more we can encourage it and normalize it, the more comfortable and just sort of opening up the idea that it isn't just travel mugs. Why should coffee mugs be unique amongst the thought process of I could bring my own and therefore not have to take the waste. So for bringing your own, verbally and visually encourage guests. I keep hoping my ice cream shop, I'm trying to convince them that they should do their own spoon and then give me a 5-cent discount every time I bring my own spoon. We should get the whole neighborhood doing it. Anybody who can walk celebrates the idea that folks are bringing their own mug, spoon, container, celebrate their efforts, and also reduce your costs. Complementary to letting guests bring their own is you can offer them on the spot. Well, instead of a disposable one, here's one that you can use now and bring it back. Either we're going to sell it to you, and then if you bring it back, maybe we have some sort of discount or something to recognize that. There's some brand loyalty and business loyalty there that you're building in with that. Or it's a deposit, and you bring it back and we'll wash it and we'll reuse it and send it out. Those are 2 great opportunities for, again, bringing reusables in, but allowing it to also be takeaway. The conservatory, the business that we talked about earlier, they did do a reusable mug as an optional replacement for their drinks. You know, again, like often in these cafes, you're getting your drink, you may stop and eat, and then you may leave. So you might need to take that mug with you. So they created a reusable mug branded for their business, and they saw a 30% reduction in how much single-use plastics for those items they were reducing. And additionally, they were able to cut the plastic sleeve items for the disposable cups because they didn't need those as well. So 30% on the lids, 30% on the cups, 30% on the sleeves, or I guess 40% almost on the cups actually. And they had customers using their branded mug and bringing those mugs back. And again, you can see the cost savings and the tremendous amount of items that they were able to cut from their plastic footprint. And I believe they instituted a 10-cent discount for bringing your mug back to encourage folks to bring it back. So it increases customer loyalty, additional revenue stream for your business for these branded items, and reduces your ongoing disposable costs. I'll mention this one really briefly. This particular one, I think in the future is going to be much more relevant, which is the employing a service that manages your reusables for you, that provides the containers. People take the containers away, people drop the containers off to them, they wash them, they resupply you, similar to a linen service or maybe a fresh flower service that some businesses have. This is an idea that we're seeing a lot of pilots explore, but we're not seeing a lot of really strong established programs that are really proving them that they have the penetration and the longevity yet for this. But I think it's something that a lot of people are talking about. And depending on where you're at, you may want to look at, are there people trying to do this? Could your business be an early adopter of this kind of a program? And that may make sense for you depending on the other your business situation and how much you use these containers and how strong that program is in your area. Okay, the last strategy I'm going to talk about is to switch to compostables. If you really, really, really need single use, and there are some cases, you know, where the situation really demands something that can be discarded after the use, you can switch to making it compostables. And here we're going to talk a little bit about, you know, why composting matters. So as we're thinking about plastic waste, and we at Humane Action Pittsburgh, looking at our No Plastic Please campaign and talking to folks about reducing plastic items, you do run into these situations where it is critical, or it is perceived to be critical, to have a single-use item. So you don't want that item to be plastic, but it needs to be an item that can support, you know, a drink or a hot soup or a sandwich, close up and secure the food. So you need containers that are designed for food that will go into the environment and not create all of these downstream health problems and environmental issues. And that is compostables. But if you start talking about compostables, what you realize is we haven't invested in composting as a system in our society, not like we have with recycling. And many people don't understand some basics about composting. And there aren't a ton of composting. There's not a lot of composting infrastructure. I mean, we have municipal infrastructure around trash, around garbage, around water, sewer. We have structure throughout our cities that supports the cycling of these materials, but not for compostables. Which makes it a really interesting opportunity for businesses, again, to be on the forefront, because we are starting to see small composting businesses pop up for residential and for businesses. And they do exactly what your trash service does. They come, they take your container full of food and compostable materials, they take it away, they compost it off site, they handle all of that. Some of them will bring you back very nice compost several times a year. That's sort of your share of the composting soil that's produced through the composting process. We're starting to see an increase even from 5 years ago here in Pittsburgh. I think we have at least 8 well-established composting services now in Pittsburgh. That, and before it was, I think there were maybe 2 or 3 that were known. So it's definitely a growing sector. And if we want to support individuals using compostables as alternatives, we also need to have the composting back end in place. Because if compostables go out into the environment, into like a non-managed environment, they can still produce, like many organics can produce greenhouse gases as well. So we don't want to generate just because it's not plastic doesn't mean it's free in terms of trash and waste. Ideally, that compostable material is going to some kind of compost process, whether that's your backyard or a composting service. So Reimagine Takeout is another campaign for Humane Action Pittsburgh. And this is a business and consumer facing campaign that promotes Pittsburgh's transition away from single-use plastic through the adoption of composting and compostables. The idea is a website that gives you some background on how to get started with composting, and also provides some visibility for businesses that are either providing compost services or that are using composting services or that are using compostables in their day-to-day operation, so that we can start to normalize and recognize this transition, because it is occurring. So if you're interested in composting, some tips to keep in mind as you get started, just real quick to help get you in the right frame mind. Now, a lot of things that look like they're non-plastic compostable are not actually compostable. And the best example of this, I think, is the brown craft takeout box. They look like brown paper. You think, oh, it's compostable. Most of them are lined with a poly liner, a plastic liner. And so they are not appropriate for composting. Arguably, there's less plastic material in the container as it's produced, but it is not appropriate for composting. So the number one thing to impress upon you is that it's not just is it labeled eco, is it labeled green? It has to truly be compostable to be safe for your backyard or to be appropriate for composting. You need to purchase BPI, in the US at least, BPI certified products. BPI is the certification standard in the United States that certifies that product is actually compostable and is safe to break down, go into the soil, go into the water. When you're looking at products, you can go to the BPI website and just enter the product serial number or whatever, and look up and verify that it is BPI certified. And most products will say BPI certified on them if they are actually BPI certified. So if they don't say it, then they probably aren't. There's been a lot of talk about bioplastics like PLA. The one caution here, they technically are biodegradable, but a lot of facilities that do composting actually can't accommodate them, can't break them down. They take a lot more heat and special like processing to actually have them break down in an effective way. And so avoiding PLA where you can, if you're moving to compostables, staying away from the bioplastics, minimizing the amount of plastics you're using is a smart way to go. Another big thing about going into composting is that not every service can support everything. Some places only take like fruits and vegetables. Some places, and they don't take meat or dairy or anything BPI certified or otherwise, any kind of containers. Other places will take almost everything. They'll take anything that's BPI certified. They'll take paper towels. They'll take meat and eggs and dairy. So it really does vary from service to service. And so when you create a relationship with a service, you want to verify with them that what you're putting in, they accept. Because the last thing you want to do is contaminate their entire process by putting in items that actually are not appropriate for their process or that actually have plastic in them. And then the last big tip, especially for businesses, if you're doing composting on site, is that clear signage is really, really important. Consumers are not yet educated on what's compostable and what's not. I personally suggest putting the actual item on the sign like this one demonstrates. This is the clearest. Don't just say plate, put the actual plate that you serve up there so that people really understand, yes, I'm putting it in the right place, because you don't want to create a contaminated stream where you're missing out on the compostables, they're going into the landfill because people didn't know that they could be composted, or you've got things going into the compost bin that actually are not compostable and are contaminating your compost. And finally, the last thing I'll say is that's really important if you're looking to move your business away from these single-use plastics is you should be aiming to grow your success. And you do that by, getting the team on board, your staff, bringing them into that question of what are we doing and why are we doing this? Because they're the ones that are going to have to change their habits on whether or not they hand a spoon or what they look at when they take the delivery or the takeout order. Tell your customers what you're doing and why. Put signs up in your business. Talk about it on social media. Normalize making these transitions, and then look for places to register your business efforts. There are many sites like Reimagine Takeout that are looking to highlight businesses that are moving away from single-use plastics. There may be some specific to your city. So look for places for you to sign up your site as your business as, we're low plastic. Even Yelp, I believe, in a couple of years ago, and I think in 2022, they allowed folks to register in the amenities as like, we have plastic-free packaging. And they're seeing a huge increase in the amount of people searching for eco-friendly businesses. And then the last thing is track your effort. It's so rewarding and motivating to see this is how much money we've saved, and here's how many items we're no longer putting into the environment. And so if you're implementing changes, also implement a way to track. It doesn't have to be precise every cup, but at a basic level, what's our impact? How are these decisions actually positively impacting our plastic footprint as a business? That's everything. I hope that was helpful, and I believe we are at the end of time, but I'm happy to answer questions for those of us that are live in the room.
Oh, thank you so much, Sabrina. I'm gonna hop in and just express. So I kind of work tangentially in this industry, working for Humane Action Pittsburgh. I'm not a plastics expert, but still, there were so many like shocking statistics that you provided, and so I find this to be very motivating, and really appreciate you putting all of this together in such a digestible format for businesses to be able to accommodate, the changing needs of our society to truly be more sustainable. I did make a note. I really thought that $11.5 billion stat for, litter cleanups was like so surprising. And I just wanted to highlight quickly that we do have another program called Pittsburgh Ploggers. That obviously there's only so much time, we can't get into everything, but if people are interested, they can check out pittsburghploggers.com. And we do still try to utilize the app Literati to track our litter cleanups and the pieces of trash. And that also, supports that most of the litter we're cleaning up is single-use plastic. And so getting involved in your local communities to help out in that way, as well as an individual or a business, is a great way to support this cause. And we are at time. So I know that we don't want to keep people over, but thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Thank you, Sabrina, for the time again. And definitely check out servingupsustainability.com for more resources. If you missed the other talks in this series, they'll be available on there in recorded format, and you can get your certification for watching all 3 in the series. So have a great day, everyone. Thanks again.